This morning, the Seapower and Projection Forces Subcommittee meets to hear testimony on the Department of the Air Force fiscal year 2022 budget request. Before us today to discuss that request are three witnesses who are no strangers to our subcommittee, and we welcome you all back. This morning, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Ms. Darlene Costello, Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans and Programs, Lieutenant General David Nahom, and Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration, and Requirements, Lieutenant General Hino. Thank you all again for being with us. The normal housekeeping that we've heard ad nauseum. I'm going to make a brief opening statement and then yield to my friend, Ranking Member Mr. Whitman, to weigh in, and then we'll have the witnesses begin with their statements. We have members of the subcommittee participating remotely today. Members participating remotely are reminded to keep themselves on mute until they're recognized to speak. In addition, remote members are reminded that once they do start speaking, there is a slight delay in the camera feed switching its focus to you. As a result, please include a brief preamble of some kind before you start into your questions to the witnesses. So we'll get started now with my opening statement. The bombers, tankers, and tactical airlifters under our subcommittee oversight form the backbone of our ability to project force and support operations around the world. With increasing age and readiness challenges, the current airlift fleet is already strained in meeting key warfighting requirements. Like fiscal year 2021, the Department of Air Force's budget request for 2022 proposes force structure cuts across these critical capabilities, retiring dozens of aircraft over the next 5 years, and asks Congress to redirect a large share of the recouped money towards modernization and emerging technologies. The question for our subcommittee as we begin our work on the next NDAA is whether this budget request properly balances investment in the future with the assumed risk of strained capacity today. Important to note at the outset, this budget does bolster investment in future bomber forces with increases in funding for the B-21, readying Ellsworth Air Force Base to host the first operational B-21s, and the modernization of the B-52 Legacy bomber with new engines, communication systems, and radars. Almost all of these efforts in the past have had strong congressional support, and I expect that trend to continue. The budget also continues to procure 14 new KC-46 tankers in 2021 while retiring 32 legacy tankers. At the same time, the Air Force plans to continue accepting new KC-46s for limited operations despite the 6 Category 1 deficiencies on the aircraft. I think all of us in this committee who know this issue well, expect consistent and transparent follow-up from the Air Force to ensure that the platform that's being delivered to our airmen is safe, effective, and reliable. As the witnesses know well, this subcommittee was very engaged and active in last year's NDAA in the process of addressing the deficiencies. In fact, just a few months ago, myself and a dozen or so members had the opportunity to fly in a KC-46 and utilize the remote vision system firsthand. That visit reaffirmed to all of us that there still is a fundamental problem with the original RBS design that must be fixed to make this system fully operational. The good news is that a real hardware solution has been agreed to with the manufacturer. Now the task ahead for Congress and the Air Force is to safely and expeditiously execute that solution. To that end, the budget asks this committee to authorize a balancing act, including retirement of fully functional tankers in exchange for the KC-46. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses what level of risk this plan will create for the flight and its crews. In addition, I know a number of members are concerned that the Air Force's plan for sustaining the tactical airlift capabilities of our Air National Guard. In the past, this committee has pursued a two-pronged approach on this important issue. First, directing congressional-directed investment in modernization, like upgraded avionics, safety-enhancing propellers, and high-performance engines. And second, pursuing congressionally directed procurement of new C-130Js. I say congressionally directed because it has been Congress, and in many cases this subcommittee, who has led these efforts. The absence of upgrades in the proposed budget, frankly, is confounding to me, particularly the propeller enhancement, which in my opinion is all about safety. I would note that this is an issue which has always had strong bipartisan support. Lastly, the B-52 investments proposed this year are mainly in the commercial engine replacement program known as SERP, due to be awarded this year. The SERP supports nuclear and conventional operations by replacing the current aging TF-33 Pratt & Whitney 103 engine on the B-52H aircraft. As I stated earlier, overall, I think there's been broad consensus on the need to replace the existing engine. However, I'm particularly concerned that a lack of adequate guardrails has resulted in a requested cost increase in SERP to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in just 1 year. If this re-engineering program was a regular program at this point, that spike would clearly be approaching a Nunn-McCurdy breach, which I think should be a serious concern to every member in this subcommittee. And again, I'm sure we'll be focusing on this issue today and certainly in the lead up to our mark. Again, this covers my initial opening comments, and now I would welcome opening remarks from my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Rob Whitman.
Well, Chairman Courtney, thanks again. Thanks much for your leadership. And we have some challenging things before us. I appreciate you reflecting on those, and I'd like to echo some of your concerns. And again, I want to thank our witnesses today for coming in and testifying. Let me begin by saying this: a bad contract leads to perverse incentives. And unfortunately, I think that we're working with a bad contract with the KC-46A tanker. Think about this. To date, the KC-46A has had problems holding the fuel it has, delivering fuel it provides, and in some cases, has the potential to severely damage receiving aircraft. It even has problems being able to hold the sewage from onboard passengers. Boeing has reported to have lost over $5 billion to date on this seemingly simple 767 conversion effort, and it's late in delivering a myriad of aircraft, in some cases dating back to aircraft ordered over 5 years ago. The Air Force has reported that it does not anticipate having a fully functional tanker until 2024. A fully functional tanker until 2024. Just think about that. I think the root cause of this increasingly troubled aircraft is a bad contract, and I further believe that Boeing has little incentive to correct these debilitating deficiencies. Boeing has naturally responded in an attempt to stop the bleeding and is seeking additional compensation and sustainment. It has been reported that Boeing has upcharged one of our FMS partners by a factor of 15 or 1,500% for previously negotiated spares. Additionally, Air Force has been unable to substantiate over $10 million in additional spares and has decided to forego ordering other critical spares for this aircraft. Again, perverse incentives. And we all know sustainment is reliant upon spares. We need to change the course on this troubled contract, I believe. And I think one of two options need to be pursued. The Air Force could either change the contract incentive structure and actively manage the KC-46A development, or we could seek a new path and pursue a non-developmental of the tanker effort. Without pursuing one of these paths at this point, I am confident that we will continue to see poor performance and an increasingly negative impact on tanker capacity. That capacity is going to be diminished. And as we hear from folks across the spectrum, whether it's Air Force, whether it's the combatant commands, TRANSCOM, and others, the tanker is that critical link for us to be able to compete with our pacing adversaries. Additionally, I'm concerned about the significant cost increase in the B-52 re-engineering program. In FY22, the budget request from the Air Force projected a 50% cost increase in development. This effort is being pursued under the Middle Tier Acquisition Authority that allows the military services to accelerate prototyping efforts. But as we are seeing in this case, the lack of rigor and concurrency of effort also leads to cost escalation. We can and must do better. On a positive note, I continue to be impressed by the active contract management and collaboration by the Air Force with Northrop Grumman on the B-21 contract. So there are good things going on. This close cooperation and efficient incentive structure leads to success in production and should significantly improve long-term maintenance. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing the first flight of this aircraft next year and supporting advanced production of B-21 aircraft in our FY22 NDAA. To quote one of our nation's foremost physicists, Albert Einstein, he said this: "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." I believe that we need to revamp our acquisition processes to ensure desirable outcomes. We need to be aware of the perils of fixed price development contracts and concurrency of development. In the end, we need to emulate the successes of the B-21 and replicate this development and production effort across a multitude of other acquisition efforts. Our witnesses today have the authority to make these desired changes, and I'll look forward to their testimony. Again, I want to thank Chairman Courtney for having this important hearing, and I want to thank him for his leadership. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
One program. I totally agree with you that so far has really been a pretty strong bright spot in terms of acquisition. And I tip my hat to the Air Force in terms of the way they've been handling that. So it's my understanding that one of the witnesses is going to sort of quarterback the opening comments, General Highnote. So I will now turn the floor over to you. And again, welcome to you and your colleagues for being here this morning.
Chairman Courtney and Ranking Member Whitman and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for having us here today as we provide testimony on the Department of the Air Force's 2022 budget request. And additionally, thank you for your leadership and dedication to the United States military and to the Department of the Air Force's 689,000 total force airmen serving around the world today. They face, and by extension, we face as we support them, a complex set of current and future security challenges that require that we think differently and act with urgency. And I have to agree with Ranking Member Whitman's use of the Einstein quote. And what I hope to be able to invite you in is our new thinking, especially regarding the future Air Force. Our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown, has articulated what is at stake. He says, unless we make significant changes to the Air Force's program force, we will not meet the pacing threat of China in 2030. And unless something changes, we will not be able to accomplish the Air Force's core missions in the future operating environment. So one of my responsibilities on the air staff is to lead the team that assesses our position vis-a-vis our competitors, including China. And one of the most remarkable differences between us and China is the difference in the sense of urgency to change and modernize. We can say definitively that China's actions show a sense of urgency. They see a future that is very different from the one that we would want to see, and they are moving with purpose to realize that future. Their efforts include a massive buildup of military power and a clear intent to use that military to create leverage on us and on our allies and partners. I think the members of the bipartisan Future of Defense Task Force, on which some of you serve, put it well when they concluded China represents the most significant economic and national security threat to the United States over the next 20 to 30 years. As I've talked with many of you about this, I sense a shift in our collective thinking. And even in today's hearing, I think we've sensed a sense of urgency that is changing. We're waking up to this challenge, and 2022 offers us another opportunity to change so that our actions match that growing sense of urgency. Together, we have done it before, and under this committee's oversight and leadership, along with our industry partners and innovative airmen, we've built the preeminent power projection capability in the world today. And I'm going to discuss briefly the elements of that capability and how we intend to keep these viable as we go into the future. The Air Force provides the sole long-range bomber capability for the Joint and Allied Forces, and our fleet is in high demand across the globe. Combatant commands have discovered the flexibility and messaging power of the Bomber Task Force, and this is why you've seen the recent headlines highlighting how our bombers are operating with our allies in places like Japan and Norway. Our 2022 budget continues to fund this flexible bomber capability while setting up a transition from 3 bomber fleets to 2, the B-21 and the rebuilt B-52. And we recognize the the importance of the CERT program and look forward to discussing that today. As we also discuss power projection, we must remember that the Air Force provides air refueling capacity that makes power projection possible for both the Joint Force and for our allies. As we transition to a two-tanker fleet of modernized KC-135s and the new KC-46, we will divest of the KC-10 primarily so that we can free up the airmen we need to build the KC-46 into the capability the taxpayer has paid for. And Ranking Member Whitman, I think we absolutely understand the concern that you have. And as we do what Chairman Courtney called the balancing act of being able to draw down the KC-46 while we stand up the draw down the KC-10 while we stand up the KC-46. Our primary driver, our limitation is our airmen. We just don't have the manpower to keep one at one level while we build the other one up, and that's the balancing act that we have to do, understanding the limitations that we've had with the airframe so far. And what I can say as someone like Chairman Courtney, who's flown in the aircraft recently, is that I think three things are true. Number one, this is going to be a good air refueling aircraft for us in the future. Number two, it today has the capacity and capability to take some of that daily responsibility off of the Joint Force, and we can certainly talk about the risk associated with that. But number three, and I agree with Chairman Courtney on this, that camera's not ready for combat, and we have to fix it. And it's frustrating to everybody that what we're doing, but we're going to go fix it. And that's why our plan makes use of the KC-46 in the near term while also fixing that camera as soon as possible. One area where our investments have paid tremendous dividends is in airlift. Our airlift fleet is the envy of the air forces around the world, and this year's budget continues to invest in the C-5, the C-17, and C-130 fleets. There's been a lot of discussion about tactical airlift in the future, and I think it's important to me as the Air Force's futurist to say something about it. The risk associated with tactical airlift, and especially when you consider the potential conflict with China, is relatively low when compared to other parts of the Air Force portfolio, as well as other parts of this committee's power projection portfolio. In areas where we run significant risk in airlift, especially in conducting logistics under attack, the C-130 capability is not well suited to address this risk. And that's why we believe we need to retire a certain number of the older C-130s while addressing this airlift risk in new ways with new capabilities. In closing, I want to say a personal thank you to the members of this committee and the broader House Armed Services Committee, past and present. When I came into the Air Force, your predecessors and even some of you had worked to develop a force that gave my generation what we needed to defend our country and interest around the globe. Together, we need to modernize and work together for that future generation so the next generation can say the same thing about us. We've done it before together, and I'm confident we can do it again. I'm honored to serve on the same team as Ms. Costello and General Nahom. I have to tell you, they work tirelessly to think differently about how we plan, program, and acquire the force that our future airmen are going to need. And we appreciate you having us today and really look forward to answering your questions.
Great. Well, thank you, General, and thank you again for coming over earlier this Congress for the Air Force 101 briefing, which again had very good attendance and lots of good feedback afterwards. I'm going to ask one question, and then I know there's a lot of interest, particularly on the KC-46 from some of the other members. So I'm going to hold off diving into that topic. But Ms. Cassell, on the B-52 re-engineering program, again, I think everybody on this subcommittee would stipulate to the fact that those are old planes and they need to have new engines, and again, I don't think there's really any question about that. The budget that came over, again, just to set it forth for the record this morning, includes a total of $715 million in RD&T&E and $74.9 million in procurement, which again, the staff sort of looked at those numbers and sort of compared it to a normal, regular program, I guess you would say, in the Department of Defense. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, and the ranking member reiterated, that exceeds 50% increase over last year. I realize, again, by law, Nunn-McCurdy doesn't apply to a contract like this, but I'm wondering if you could just sort of talk about that a little bit in terms of the sizable number. And also, given the fact that the contract award was supposed to have gone out last December 2020, it's now September is the latest we've heard. What's the timing in your mind in terms of getting this actually executed?
Well, thank you for the question. B-52 SERP is actually not, the dollars that you see across the full fit-up is for a multitude of programs, actually. The first part is the rapid virtual prototype, where we're going to literally virtualize, digitize the solution, and then down select to one engine, and then move to another mid-tier acquisition program to do a physical prototype. The reason we're doing that is to get a better estimate on cost and to reduce risk before going into a traditional program. It is our plan to end up in a traditional program before we start all of the procurement. So along the way, because there are multiple decision points put in, and September is what you mentioned, that is the next major decision point of whether we continue down this path or make a change, will be to look at the rapid virtual prototype status, its cost, its risk. If basically a technology risk assessment will be something like that will be conducted in the mid-tier acquisition, and we'll use that information to determine if we're going to go to the next step and do the physical prototype. And then there'd be another decision point before we would go forward with full production for replacement. We know the capability, it needs to be replaced, so there is a lot of incentive to find a way to do this in an affordable and timely manner, but we are also learning our way as we go through mid-tier acquisition. I would say this program was one of the early mid-tier acquisition programs, and maybe didn't have the rigor of the definition that we are now putting on these mid-tier acquisition programs. So sometimes when you look at a number from early on till now, it might be different, but I've been working very hard with our program teams to properly define it. So for this mid-tier acquisition effort, we will have the right dollars and schedule, and we'll measure against that. The same for the next one, and the same for the ultimate program. We may decide early to just go to a traditional program, depending on the data. That's what we're going to be looking at. This is our chance to look and see if there's still is goodness position, or if it's time to go forward with a program of record. Relative to the timing, we talked September and the dollars that we have. I have a feeling that some of the dollars you're looking at are for a variety of efforts and may not only be for the mid-tier acquisition SERP dollars, but we'll make sure that we clarify that because there is a lot of B-52 work that falls into program lines, and I think it even confuses me sometimes. I always have to ask for the breakout because there's B-52 SERP, RMP, there's lots of other efforts going on, and sometimes the dollars get confusing. But we are watching carefully the guardrails we set up, and we're looking forward to shaping the program properly.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, when we got the budget, I guess it was like about 10 days ago. I mean, that $800 million increase kind of jumped off the page. So our staff, and again, I know Rob's, Dave Sinicki and Phil and Kelly Goggin, are going to be definitely scrubbing that one in the days ahead. So I'll now yield to Mr. Whitman for his questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your perspective and your leadership there. There are a lot of challenges in this NDA coming up that this subcommittee will address, and I am confident with your leadership that we will do that successfully. Ms. Costello, I want to begin with you in asking you about the KC-46 contract, and I just want to get your perspective. If you believe it's delivering the desired capability to the warfighter, and if it's not, should the Air Force pursue changes to the contract structure to improve performance? I just want to get your perspective on how you believe that is unfolding before us.
Thank you for that question. So obviously we're not getting the full capability that we contracted for, but the contract does enable us to get that capability at a future time without us having to expend additional money, at least for the RVS. Looking back, I think we would have definitely chosen a different contract structure, But at this point where we are in the program, to go and reopen this contract, I believe would cost the government a lot more than continuing forward, which is why we are continuing with the contract and accepting the deliveries of these aircraft, with Boeing committed to funding the fixes when they are completed with their design and implementing those, so that we will have full capability. Reference was made to the active management. I think the MOA that we did, the Memorandum of Agreement last year, relative to the RVS design and our engagement, is an example of how we're trying to apply the active management to a fixed price type contract. It's an each, but it has worked out to get us the solution we need, and we just need to finish that design and get it installed so that we can provide our airmen what they need.
Sure. Well, Ms. Costello, I would say that, even the RVS agreements and changes, I still believe leave something to be desired as far as how that all had to come about. I think it's gotten to a better point, but it took a long time to get there. And the myriad of other deficiencies with the aircraft, I think, just point to the problems with the contract. Again, I want to emphasize, I think the structure of the B-21 contract is what the Air Force needs to replicate going forward. I'm still not convinced that it wouldn't be better to recompete the KC-46A contract. But that being said, I want to get your perspective too about KC-46A spares. It's been reported that they have the cost has increased by 1,500%. Give us an idea about your perspective on that, and what are you doing to pursue this deficient effort? I just think it's mind-boggling to me to understand that that's where we are.
So relative to the KC-46 spares and the reference you make to the inflated cost for the Japan FMS in particular, so we are dealing with commercial of a type in this case. So for our FMS customers, the government goes forward and tries to get a fair and reasonable price and serve them well. And that is what our head of contracting and our contracting team was working on. We did find that there were several components or spare parts that were considered commercial, I will say, of a type, because they're not sold in like Home Depot or anything, and it's not being sold to anyone other than the government. So finding data prices was challenging. So there are rules that we had to follow, and our head of contracting looked at that, and for 18 months was trying to get additional data from Boeing. Boeing was unable to get it from some of their subcontractors. So it did cause us a dilemma. It was a very hard decision for our head of contracting to make. But in the end, because we had to consider the needs of the Japan Air Force and what they needed these tanker, and they needed the spares to be there when their tanker arrived, that was heavily considered. It was a difficult decision, but our head of contracting is allowed to make that considering all of these factors. So that is the decision that was made. It was, in the end, within the budget that the Japan has allocated for it, and we were very transparent with Japan all along and told them of what we knew we had fair and reasonable pricing on and the amount that we did not. So there was full transparency along the way, and in the end, they wanted to go forward with that. Now, relative to going in the future, we are looking at setting up an IDIQ competitive spares contract to use for all the KC-46 assets so that we can be more responsive and not have to deal with sole source contracting on every part with Boeing necessarily. So we're actively working on that and accelerating that.
Well, I think that's going to be critical. I think this is a very deficient effort by any measure. Foreign military sales, I think, are critical for the United States, and it just doesn't seem in any way, shape, or form fair to find ourselves in this particular situation with the cost of these spares. So anyway, with that, Lieutenant General Nahon, let me go to you very quickly. I want to ask you about reducing the C-130 force structure and transitioning the C-130H squadrons to other missions. And last year, as you know, General Brown said the Air Force is committed to only remissioning a C-130H unit if it's agreed upon and suitable replacement remission can be arranged. So if the respective state opposes a C-130H remissioning initiative, my question is will General Brown pursue a C-130 reduction over the state's opposition? I think it's key to understand what's that dynamic going to be in that realm.
Ranking Member, thank you much for the question. Our position has not changed at all from the Air Force. We are not intending to force a unit conversion. Our vision is a C-130 fleet, slightly smaller than we have right now, outlined very correctly by General Highnote about the amount of risk we're buying across the Air Force and the risk we have in the tactical lift portfolio. Those two are inconsistent. We actually have a lot more risk in other parts of the portfolio. We believe the C-130 fleet at 255. We have actually really good data to support that, and I welcome a conversation at a classified level so I can show you the data that shows where 255 we believe is the right number. We've said all along that we will try to get to 255 at the pace at which we can get there, working very closely with the units. We need these units. We don't need any units to go away. There's a lot of mission that we have as we look forward to future combat. A very good example is what we're doing in Alabama with the Air Force Reserve C-130H unit. Our intention is to transition them to the MH-139 training site for our newest helicopter. We believe it's a win-win. The unit's very excited about it. The state's very excited about it. And it's a wonderful place to train helicopters because it abuts directly up with the Fort Rucker helicopter airspace. And so we're looking for win-wins like that across the enterprise. We were able to leave the Martin State unit in the A-10, which the unit wanted to stay in the A-10, and that actually helped us out as well in the Air Force. So again, I think we can find some win-wins out there. Will we get to 255? I don't know. I would like to, so then we could utilize that manpower for other things. One mission we're looking to expand in, we need to find a wing that wants to expand into cyber warfare. And so we're actively looking at, is there a wing, a state interested in opening a cyber warfare wing? We think it's a very attractive mission, and one we absolutely need to expand into more as we look at future warfare, not to mention in the domestic side as well. So we think there's a potential there, but again, we'll continue to work with these units, and we are no intention of forcing a unit to transition.
Well, Lieutenant General Home, thanks. I know Virginia's been one of the first states to open up a cyber unit with its National Guard, so I'm sure the Air National Guard element there would also be interested. Thanks, too, for emphasizing. I think you hit the nail on the head with our C-130H units. It's about working in conjunction with the states. The greatest asset that we have there is not the aircraft. Listen, the aircraft is great. The greatest asset we have there are the air crews and the pilots that keep those aircraft in the air. Tactical lift is critically important. Maintaining the skill level and the experience with those air crews and those pilots is key. So whatever the Air Force can do to continue along those lines, I think is going to be critically important as we go in the future. So thanks again. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that and your comments, particularly about the Air Guards. So next up is Mr. Langevin, and he'll be followed by Mr. Kelly.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Very insightful. I want to turn further to great power competition and the challenges that we face if conflict ever breaks out. Clearly, we're going to be fighting the away game, and it's going to be significantly challenging, to say the least. During my city subcommittee hearing on electromagnetic spectrum operations, one of the witnesses mentioned that DoD EMS investment is heavily tied to legacy platforms and consolidated in limited, expensive programs. The Air Force's first fielded ABMS capability, the Airborne Edge Node, seems to fit this trend. So it will cost, as I understand it, 3/4 of the Air Force's ABMS RDT&E budget, and is designed for the KC-46. Ms. Costello and General Highnote, should we continue to expect big, expensive projects from ABMS?
Representative Langevin, thank you for the question, and as always, you are well informed with many of the things that we are doing. So you mentioned the idea of the electromagnetic spectrum and large platforms, maybe expensive, exquisite platforms. And what you are seeing right now, in fact, I had the opportunity yesterday to sign off on a very different set of requirements for our activities in the electromagnetic spectrum. And what you're seeing right now is we are walking a very intentional path away from specific solutions that are attached to specific platforms to much more general or modular solutions that can be upgraded, that can be software defined, and even coded on the fly. Happy to come over and talk to you more about that, because there are some very interesting developments both in our R&D as well as commercial R&D to make that transition. I will say that one of our tensions within our advanced battle management program is the incremental advances versus the disruptive advances. And so what you see in our increment one or capability release one on ABMS is an incremental advance. We want to make sure that the F-22, the F-35, and the KC-46, three key elements of power projection for the joint force, we want to make sure that they're connected well. And after that, what we want to be able to do is build out away from that core. So yes, that is in many ways an incremental way of looking at our advancement. At the very same time, we have disruptive programs that are really more like efforts in the hopper, ready to go. And as we experiment and learn, we expect that we're going to be going from that more incremental, more traditional way of connecting our platforms to something that looks much more modular, much more software defined, much more flexible, and frankly, that has a government reference architecture that we can scale across all of our platforms. And so I'll turn it over to Ms. Costello to see if she has anything further on that.
Thank you.
I did want to get to just, if I could, General Hinote, can you talk through what we're doing to improve the projection force's survivability in an era of great power competition, though? And I also wanted to ask how you would incorporate directed energy into the Air Force's projection force before my time runs out.
Okay, sure. Yes, sir. As we think about power projection, and especially as about bombers and tankers, we certainly, as we're thinking through the types of capabilities that say our future bombers, future ISR equipment is going to need, we're going to need to be able to incorporate the most advanced electromagnetic waveforms and techniques. And what you're seeing right now is the inside of those programs is developing a much more modular system for that, much more software defined. And this is where we have a brand new, very exciting effort going on with our electromagnetic spectrum wing. These are going to be the airmen that are going to be in charge of making sure that we go from the library of electromagnetic threats. That is the traditional way of doing it. We just have a huge library. We upload the library every few months. And what we're going to is a much more programmed, on-the-fly capability. And I would need to come over and talk to you more about that in a closed forum to be able to get into the details of that.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, and that's a really important question, and hopefully, we'll figure out a way to take you up on that offer, because I think Jim's point is well taken.
Yeah, please, let's do it. And I apologize to Ms. Costello that I didn't get to her. 5 minutes goes by fast, and I need to get those questions in. Thank you.
All right. Well, next up is General Kelly, and he'll be followed by Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for being here today. I recognize the importance of a strong Air Force Reserve component that can provide needed surge capability to the active component during times of peak demand. The Reserve component is an especially critical force provider of inter and intra-theater mobility assets to United States Transportation Command via the Air Force's Air Mobility Command. To that end, I'm concerned that the Air Force continues to divest legacy aircraft from the reserve component while it modernizes the active component. Lieutenant General Hinote, can you describe the Air Force's sustainment and modernization plans for the global fleet of C-17 and C-130 aircraft broken out by active and reserve component?
So I'm going to. Sir, I'm going to have to let General Nahom take that one. That's in his job jar, so we'll pass it off here.
Sir, and Congressman, thank you for the question. And I assure you, as we look at the fleet for U.S. Air Force, we always look across the total force. It is certainly not a divesting of our reserve forces at their expense for the active forces, not at all. Because when we fight as a total force, and we know we look at the entire fleet as that. In terms of the C-17, the C-17 is a long-term platform, and the modernization efforts are fully funded. And again, that's across the entire fleet's Guard, Reserve, and active duty. On the C-130 side, the C-130Js, we're obviously we still have some congressionally procured aircraft coming in over the next few years, and we will be upgrading those to the 8.1 to make sure we get those to the level we need. In terms of the C-130Hs, the center wing boxes, all the required avionics, AMP1, AMP2, and then in cases where we need the added performance with the propellers and the motor and the new motors. If you look at our C-130 fleet, when I said 255, that breaks down right now. We have 163 C-130Js either existing or on order. And then that breaks down to 92 C-130Hs, which we intend to upgrade that to the level we need to and move forward with that fleet. And I certainly know we want to maintain that fleet moving forward. But I'll tell you also, in the tactical airlift fleet, and I do want to pass to General Hinote real quickly because we've got to look beyond. When we look at lift, especially tactical lift, we've got to look to the future. Because it's not just C-130s. There's other things we need to do. And Q, if you don't mind, pass it off to you.
No, and in fact, there's a really exciting story to be told here. It's not reflected in this budget yet because we're still looking to see where we could go with this. But clearly, as we think about logistics and logistics under attack, that could be under attack by China, Russia, or any other adversary, what we see is that the capability for vertical lift is going to be really important for us, i.e. getting away from the fixed runway so that we can do logistics in a way that is somewhat disruptive and frankly a lot harder to target. So there are quite a few efforts going on. As an example, we're following very closely with the Army's Future Vertical Lift set of programs. And at the very same time, we're exploring vertical lift programs inside of our RDT&E as well. And what we think is that this may be a very important reserve component, part of the reserve component, because the idea of vertical lift could also play a huge role in some of the responsibilities that, say, governors have.
Okay, let me. I got one more question I want to get to, and if I can, and I apologize for interrupting, but like they said, 5 minutes is a short time. I propose that we put tail numbers on the new aircraft that we're issuing to our Guard and Reserve, and I'm getting a lot of pushback on that. And I want you guys to tell me why I think a fleet of rental cars would be managed better than a personal automobile that I own myself that I make the payment on. And so I'm getting a lot of pushback on that, something that we've done for going back to World War II. People had their names painted on aircraft. They named them, they loved them. The crews and pilots loved that aircraft, and they took care of it because it's theirs. But I'm getting pushback and wanting to do a study. Well, we don't need a study. We know airmen take care of the aircraft they own that is theirs. So can you guys explain to me why we would not want, other than to take away push all the legacy equipment to the Guard and Reserve, can you tell me why we wouldn't want to put aircraft tails on aircraft that we've been doing for a century or as long as we've been flying?
Sir, I think I may need, and I'm sure I don't have the time to, because I may have to dive into this question a little more. When aircraft are in the Guard, they actually stay in the Guard and the active duty. We don't switch those aircraft. And the only time an aircraft leaves a location when it goes to long-term depot maintenance and historically it comes back to that unit. Now, there is some differences in some of our heavy fleets. I know the tankers and others that they actually, when an aircraft goes to depot, they take the next one off the depot line and bring it back. There is some switching there because it makes the most sense in certain fleet management. I grew up in the fighter world where a tail was owned by a unit, whether it's a guard, active, or reserve, and it returned to that unit following depot. So I think we very carefully manage these things, and I think we're actually in a really good spot. And certainly, we do not give the oldest platforms to the guard. I tell you, the F-35 bed down is a perfect example. The next 4 bed downs are all going to guard and reserve units.
Okay, Daryl, I'm sorry,
Thank you.
because I actually was very interested in hearing the answer to that question, and hopefully we'll continue, Trent, because I can feel your passion coming through the
Thank you,
Zoom.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Norcross is up next, and I think Mr. Carl was slated next. I'm not sure if he's still with us or not. And if Mr. Carl is not, then Mr. Vela was after him, and I'm not sure if Phil is still with us or not. And if Phil is not with us, then it'll be Mr. Golden, followed by Ms. Loria. So Don, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman. Just the conversations we continue to have with the KC-46. It's so frustrating, but we are getting closer by the day. But I want to talk about the B-52 engine issue. Ms. Costello, you talked about the reason for the mid-tier acquisition was so that you could minimize the risk. Paraphrasing. Exactly what risk are you speaking of? Is it a technological? Is it cost? Is it time? Which risk in this program is your biggest concern?
So for the B-52 commercial engine replacement program and the mid-tier acquisition associated with that, the first one is the virtual prototype. So it was taking modern commercial engines and basically creating a digital twin, a digital model of how that would be in the B-52. So it's integration risk. It's making sure that everything will fit and function properly. And doing that, instead of starting a brand new program and going 2 years before you could even get to that phase, by using the mid-tier acquisition, we could start that modeling working with industry right away, working with multiple, and then we can select which one we want to go forward with. So that's the risk that I was speaking of in this first phase.
So it's all the above then, because the chairman talked about that 800 million, and that certainly has caught people's attention. The idea of going this route was it was a more mature engine that could much easier been shifted over, but also the costs should have been relatively more focused. You shouldn't be getting those type of surprises. Are you comfortable where the numbers are coming in on the program?
So we will be having a review in the future that will work with the cost estimate, and that is coming up in the summer before we go forward with the program beyond this point. Again, I believe the budget numbers includes a variety of things within B-52, and I'd like to be able to provide that clarity to you all in a separate, provide that product to you to make sure there's visibility of how the funds break out within the B-52 program, because there are a variety of efforts, and it's easy to compare that number to what was a number before. I just want to make sure we're all with the right number. So I will get that back for you all so we have that.
Appreciate it. General Nahom, the KC-46, from when the original program of record started to where we are now with the RVS, is been primarily following time. We lost the time, and you really can't make up for that. But would you say the system that we're looking at now, that it is probably unparalleled in the world for the accuracy and what it can do?
Sir, go ahead.
Are you speaking on the RVS system specifically?
Yes. Yeah, Right now, as General Hino said, the lead-in, as well as what Ranklin Whitman said, couldn't agree more. The RVS system, we have to fix this RVS system. Now, that being said, it can refuel airplanes, and we both flew on that airplane that day with a bunch of the members, and you watch it, it works.
No, I
There's
understand.
limitations.
I'm talking
I don't want to
about
take it.
the system that we agreed or close to agreeing upon. We went much different for the three-dimensional. That system is 10 years newer than we would have gotten if we accepted the original one. Is that correct?
That's true.
That's absolutely true. The RVS 2.0 digital system is the latest, greatest technology. It is not what was on the contract initially, and we wouldn't have got it on the day of that contract award. So the RVS 2.0 effort that we've gotten is taking advantage of current technology and state of the art.
And that will be helpful if we go to an unmanned system. It can work much better under what would be the new configuration for the next generation. Isn't that correct?
We do consider this a step in the right direction for an unmanned system, and I believe Boeing also does.
Can you, to the degree we can have the conversation here, the EMP hardening of a KC-46 versus the legacy KC-10 and 135. Can you talk about what each of those platforms can and cannot do in the event of a pulse?
I don't have that data with me to compare among them, but I'd be happy to take that for the record and get that information to you.
Thank you. The point I'm trying to make is the time is lost and there's no excuse in the world, and I'm not defending Boeing at all, but we have a platform that will be a communication mode that is unparalleled going forward. We just wish we could have done it a lot quicker. With that, I yield back my time. Thank you, Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Don. Next up is Mr. Golden, followed by Ms. Luria.
Thank you, Chairman Courtney. Ms. Costello, the United States Air Force has proposed to move 11 National Guard KC-135s from the primary mission aircraft inventory to the backup aircraft inventory. As I'm sure you know, the FY21 NDAA, Congress opposed this move, understanding that it could possibly result in a reduction of training hours, manpower, and base funding for existing National Guard air crews. So I wanted to ask, have any changes been made in the last year that would yield a different result for the National Guard with the proposed KC-135 to BAI move in FY22?
And sir, this is Gerald Nam. I'll take. I apologize. It was a little hard to hear you. I think this is about the 11 KC-135 from PMAI to BAI. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir. I don't know if you're hearing me better here, but I guess the question is, given the fact that we rejected this as a body last year, what's changed?
Sir, we are working very closely with obviously your staffs as well as AMC to try to get this PMAI BAI right. And we do want to continue the discussion because I think it's a really good discussion to have. Because when you look at our fleets, and I'll broaden this out just for 2 seconds on the rest of the fleets. We have many fleets that are misaligned. BAI is very important because when aircrafts go into long-term maintenance depot, that's why one of the reasons why you have BAI. So you don't have airplanes that should be on the line flying missions where you have crews that you're spending money on, flying hours, weapon system sustainment, other, for airplanes that are sitting in long-term depot. The 135 fleet was very much out of line, like many of our fleets were, that we had an excessive amount of airplanes in depot and much less airplanes that were actually BAI. So the bottom line is we had many PMAI airplanes sitting in depot. We're back at the units. We were paying, not only do you have crews, but you're also paying for weapon system sustainment and flying hours on airplanes that aren't there. We did this very successfully with the F-15E. We're doing this right now with the active duty F-16s because they're a little bit out of line with some of the mod lines. So we make sure that we have our fleets better aligned. Because I tell you, from being a commander, there is nothing worse than not having enough airplanes on the ramp to keep my crews current. And that happens if you're out of alignment. And that's what we were attempting to do with the KC-135 fleet as well.
Thank you for that, Lieutenant General. I appreciate your working with my staff, the committee staff. Clearly up in Maine, this is an important issue, and we want to make sure that they have what they need from a manpower and training hour perspective. That's, as you know, a very important mission up there. The refueling mission is what I'm talking about. So I guess another question in the same vein, how does the Air Force envision itself maintaining the Air Guard's training, funding, and readiness levels with the proposed KC-135 force structure alignment?
Sir, I guess I might have to take that for the record and work with your staff, because I'm not really sure. Right now we are doing everything we can in terms of readiness to maintain all our funding, because I tell you, readiness is, when you look at, as we look at austere times with budget cuts or flat budgets like we're looking at now, modernization, readiness, and force structure are the three bins. And I'll tell you, we're doing everything we can to protect readiness. And I don't make that statement for active duty. That's Guard, active duty, reserve. That's the Air Force. We've got to maintain our readiness. And I'll tell you that this PMA-IBA, I think, is an important part of that, because we have to make sure our readiness dollars are correctly aligned through all our fleets, and the 135 is certainly a big part of that. But I can certainly work with your staff if I'm not hitting the mark on that answer, sir.
Yeah, certainly look forward to continuing the discussion and getting something back on the record. Thank you.
Sir.
All set, Jared? Okay, great. Thank you. And next up is Ms. Loria.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here for this hearing today. I want to go back to a comment that General Kelly made along the theme of the divest to invest. I see this to be a theme with all the services in this budget, and I specifically wanted to focus in on the B-21 bombers. In your budget request for this year, I see that the Air Force plans to decrease its bomber inventory by 17 B-1s this year, but the B-21s are not yet ready to replace these aircraft. So by retiring these aircraft early, are we leaving a gap in countering our current growing threats today with China and Russia and other malign actors? And can you quantify that and how you'll mitigate for any gap that's being left by retiring these aircraft?
Representative Laura, thank you for the question. And it gets directly after what I think is the fundamental tension that is facing the leadership of the Department of Defense right now. You correctly say that all of us are dealing with this tension. And when I was talking about the relative risk of different parts of the portfolio, and frankly, different parts of the portfolio that this subcommittee has oversight on, this is a perfect example. And when we look at as an example, tactical airlift risk versus the bomber risk, I will tell you I am much more concerned. There's a bigger sense of urgency in the bomber portfolio than in the tactical airlift portfolio for the exact reason that you are saying. And it's just true that we can't get the B-21s fast enough as these aircraft, specifically the B-1s, have become, in essence, it costs more to sustain them than the benefit you get from them. And those were decisions that were made a long time ago to defer modernization and focus on readiness. We could go back to the sequestration years, but this is why we say risk is not equivalent across all the portfolios. You correctly identify a big risk that we have. I'll turn it over to General Nahum to talk about how we're trying to mitigate that as much as we can.
Yeah, I'd say, ma'am, and the 17 B-1s is very important because we had a fleet of 62. We very carefully went through, we analyzed. We thought the number was going to be higher. We actually looked at each aircraft and said which ones are frankly too expensive and too hard to fix because we overflew this fleet so much over the ensuing years. 17 was a number. And by reducing the fleet by 17 and leaving 45 there, keeping the same level of manpower and maintenance manpower until the B-21 arrives, we think we can get the readiness level of that bomber actually higher. We can actually have more airplanes available for the combatant commanders in the interim by getting rid of the oldest, most problem aircraft in the fleets. We think that's actually paying off. Now, it's important that we work together and we maintain 45 until these units shake hands with the B-21s as they arrive. We have no intention of going below 45 because the combatant commanders need that bomber firepower in the next 5, 7, 10 years until the B-21 starts showing up in the numbers we need them. But we're watching it very closely.
Well, thank you. And I want to clarify. So you've mentioned the number 45, and I was going to ask about the combatant commanders' requirements for their most limiting O plans and the different scenarios that you're evaluating globally. Because obviously we can't count on the fact that if we encounter one conflict that we won't have malign actors elsewhere. With 45 and this current plan, can you meet those requirements in our most limiting O plan or conflict for which we're planning?
I'll tell you right now, ma'am, this goes in, leads a little bit where General Verheino was saying about, we're going to have to look at some near-term risk if we're going to get our Air Force and certainly our DoD, but we're concentrating on the Air Force, to where we need it to be for peer competition in the future.
I'm not asking about the future.
General,
I'm sorry, I'm not asking about the future. I'm asking about today. I'm asking about today and the next 3 to 5 years before the B-21 starts coming online.
First I'll say I think 45 is. I'll let you answer, but I'll tell you it's better than we had the extra 17 airplanes because we're able to concentrate our maintenance on the 45 that are left and give ourselves more capable airplanes. Is it enough? I would say probably not, but I'll let you.
No, ma'am. I mean, I'll just be flat out no. This is why I say the risk in the bomber portfolio is high. We've got to do better. We've got to accelerate the B-21 capability as quickly as we can. But in the short term, the answer is no. Those decisions were made 5, 10, 15 years ago. And we're now facing that bathtub.
Sorry, I'm about to run out of time, but my last question, is there anything this committee can do to help accelerate the delivery of the B-21s? And I know, Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
So relative to B-21, the most important thing for us to do is get through the design and complete it and not introduce the concurrency like we've talked about in some of our other programs. Once we get through that design and get the first ones delivered, we can adjust production rates and maybe affect them that way. But we have to get through the engineering with solid discipline.
Okay, so am I understanding that this aircraft is not even fully designed and we're retiring aircraft and we don't even have the design for the aircraft that is meant to replace them? Would love to follow up on that. And
we have the design. There are 2 test aircraft built, but it'll take a little while to get through all of the testing, and therefore there could be some changes as a result of the testing. That's all I was talking about there.
Great. Well, thank you. And again, it's my understanding that I think Mr. Whitman and Mr. Norcross may be organizing a trip out to Palmdale, and I would encourage all the members to get out there and see firsthand, because again, concurrency is obviously a negative place to be. But having said that, I think this program, as Mr. Whitman said at the outset, is really probably an all-star right now in terms of procurement. But still, we want to make sure the risk is reduced as much as possible. So again, we've now completed the first round of questions. I actually did want to ask another question, and I know we've got some members that have stayed with us here. So certainly we, I think we actually have done well today in terms of moving right along, and certainly and would invite them to ask a question or two. Again, to the witnesses, one program which we have not talked about this morning is the Air Force One recapitalization. And General Nahom, I guess, based on the latest in terms of what's in the budget, and certainly some of the feedback that we're hearing about this program. Again, for the record, the Air Force request is for $680 million RDT&E. The contract management agency has assessed that Boeing is at least 1 year late on the delivery of the first VC-25B aircraft, the Air Force One. COVID is apparently cited as one reason, as well as the bankrupt subcontractor for the interior of the plane. So, certainly the rumor mill is that there's going to be a request for equitable adjustment to extend the schedule and increase the VC-25B fixed price contract costs. Obviously this is a disappointment to all of us, which we thought maybe this was a program where the government actually maybe got a good deal here. I was wondering, what can you tell us when we're going to see a new schedule and any other, updates regarding the status of Air Force One?
So thank you for that question. I'll take that one.
Okay, sure.
We have received from Boeing notification of a revised schedule on their part. We are in the midst of doing a schedule risk assessment, our program is, and at that point, when they complete that, probably later this summer, we will determine if we need to make any adjustments to the schedule. What they came in with was about 12 months later than before, and they did make reference to impacts from their contractor going out of business, as well as COVID impacts. We will assess all of that. You made reference to a potential REA. They have submitted an intent letter, is what has been asked to do if they believe they've been impacted by COVID. An intent letter to tell us, and then we start that negotiation process too. So we have had a couple of those come in at a smaller level on some other programs, and in our negotiation process, we typically have been much smaller than now. So at the moment, we are assessing the schedule that they've submitted. We have completed recent design activity reviews, and we've also been working with our SD, as this is an ACAT 1D program, to make sure they are kept informed, and everybody, we've been transparent across the board program. As soon as we get the updated schedule, we'll determine if we have to adjust our baseline or schedule, and we'll make sure all are informed of that information. I expect it will be in the fall, September time.
Well, thank you for the update. Obviously that sort of begs the question about the fact that, the existing Air Force Ones, which are getting a little long in the tooth, we're going to be faced with a lot of the same questions we've talked about this morning with other platforms, which is that, trying to extend their service life carries an additional price tag. So anyway, thank you for the update, and we'll obviously be tracking that and following it very closely. Mr. Whitman, did you have any other follow-up questions you wanted to ask?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any additional questions at this time, but again, thanks to the witnesses for joining us. I think that there are a number of challenges out there with KC-46A, as well as how we are going to operationalize in a continued way the C-130s, and making sure we are cognizant of the incredible asset that our Guard units are. So we'll continue to focus on those issues. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. I see Mr. Langevin still on the screen with us. Jim, if you have any follow-up questions, the floor is yours.
Sure. I'll take advantage of that. So if that's okay, thank you for the extra time. Just on your question, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't clear on the answer. So how much time are we set back by the Air Force One program right now? It's significant?
So Boeing has proposed or informed us that they believe it'll be about 12 months beyond their original schedule. That doesn't mean that we agree with that yet. We're in the middle. Our program team is looking at what they have assumed in their schedule and doing what we call a schedule risk assessment to come up with what the program schedule would be. I wouldn't expect it to be more than what Boeing would say. We will look at that and determine if there's any additional risk or different risks that we see, and we will adjust our schedule accordingly. We've been being transparent with OSD, and probably in the September time period is when we will expect to have a new schedule if there are changes required.
And is that specific to the two new 747 models? I know there are other models that are also classified as Air Force One within that presidential fleet.
That is relative to the VC-25B program, which is the two brand new replacement, what would replace the VC-25A. And of course, it will be important when we see what the VC-25B schedule is to determine any impact to VC-25A and when it stays in service or goes out of service. We may need to put in one more maintenance cycle for that aircraft depending on the time delay.
Thank you. Switching gears to my the other question I didn't get to earlier. Last year, Dr. Roper said that tankers were going to be the first platforms to get fielded ABMS equipment. Ms. Costello, since tankers are easy to shoot down, high-value targets for our adversaries, why are we focusing on the tanker fleet first for ABMS? And that goes to my, when I was set up the question earlier about looking to, great power competition and fighting the away game.
Representative Langman, I'll take that if you don't mind, because we have quite a bit of both gaming data, modeling and simulation data on the use of tankers in a power projection situation. And what we find is you're right in that, in fact, it is a high value asset that our adversaries want to shoot down, which means that we have to protect it. And there was a time not that long ago where we didn't worry that much about protecting our high value assets in the air. And that time's passed. And we've got to, in our tactics, techniques, and procedures, protect the tanker. But because the tanker is so important, that gas and the way that we fight is such a critical input to the combat capability, we must protect the tanker. And it's one of those essential elements that you must protect and even forward as you need to. And so what we find is we structure the design around our force of being able to protect the tanker. What that means is the tanker will be there. And because the tanker will be there, it is a great platform of opportunity for a node. We're going to have thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of nodes eventually in our command and control architecture. But this will be one important node, and we can count on it when it's on station to have excess power, a significant amount of space, as well as the connectivity back to other parts of the joint force. Because of that, we're going to take advantage of it. And that's why our capability release 1 of the Advanced Battle Management System puts a capability inside the KC-46.
Very good. Anybody else have anything to add?
No, I think he covered that one well.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the extra time, Ms. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Jim. Ms. Costello, just to follow up really quickly on the Air Force One, question that Mr. Langevin asked. So assuming, let's just say a 12-month delay was granted, again, the delivery date as of now was 2024. Is that right? Just is my memory correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So if it was 12 months, it would be 2025.
And that's what we're looking at in our schedule risk assessment.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I see Ms. Luria is still connected. I'm not sure she's not on the screen. Oh, there she is. Elaine, do you have any follow-up questions you want to ask?
Mr. Chairman, no. Thank you so much again to our witnesses, but I think that they addressed my question in the first round. Very good. All right. Well, like everyone else, I do want to thank all the witnesses for their very straightforward answers this morning. And we've obviously got some work to do in a pretty compressed schedule, so I'm sure you'll be on speed dial over the next few months or so as we move forward. So thank you again to all the members for joining, and at this point I will declare the hearing adjourned. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Right.